if you're in that default fund, the thing to watch out for is de-risking. So basically, before pension freedoms came in, now most people stay invested in retirement, but before pension freedoms came in 2015, you had to buy an annuity, which is, as you know, when you're kind of like, it's kind of mimicking these kind of DB pensions. You're basically exchanging your pot for a guaranteed income till you die. So what happened was these pensions were set up so that by the time you bought your annuity, you basically had more or less cash. But the problem is now people tend to stay invested. So say you start your employer, you're happily working along, blah, blah, blah. And you've said, right, you filled in some form on your first day saying you're going to retire at 62 and you just randomly picked it, didn't you? Let's be fair. And then like 10 years before you get there, your fund, unknown to you, starts de-risking. So what that means is you're targeting an annuity at 62. So you're gradually moving into fixed income, moving more into bonds, moving more into gilts. So by the time you get to 62, you're not really that much invested in equity at all. But you carry on with your fund invested, drawing on that pension. But your fund is potentially really underperforming. And a lot of people are being de-risked, which, is a bit of a jargon, isn't it, to be honest? But basically you're being de-risked, which sounds great, doesn't it? But what it means is, like, sometimes you need a bit of investing risk to get that growth. Returns, exactly. So that is like probably the biggest issue potentially for people in workplace in terms of their fund. Like, just look at your fund, look it up.
They call it lifestyling as well, don't they? They're
like
de-risking lifestyle. And if you hear like lifestyle in the fund, that means they're tapping the brakes as you get near to retirement. You get it at the start as well in some. The foundation period is what Nest call it. 5 years of basically low equity, because their logic is people might get scared and stop contributing to an auto-enrollment scheme that they can't leave.
I think they're worried that you look and go, whoops, my pension's gone down.
But like, a new provider.
But we know that 90% of people through auto-enrollment don't opt out. They never even look at it. But then the biggest pension providers going, we're worried if the performance is bad, that they're going to leave the scheme, even though we know that most never leave the scheme. It seems like a stupid decision. We talked to the head of Nest Invest about it, actually. He sat there and we asked him why he did it. And he was like, we're not de-risking. And I was like, well, you are, aren't you?
And if you're in your 20s, you've got, investment compounding is working in your favour, and you've got, years and years for that.
You shouldn't be tapping the brakes at that point. You shouldn't be like heavy bond allocation.
Exactly. And whereas, if you are thinking of getting an annuity, then it might be right for you. It's just really dependent. If you are thinking of taking a tax-free lump sum, you might want to ring fence some of that if you're drawing it soon. But in general, if you're planning to stay invested, then you're probably best off staying more invested and not being overly in bonds and gilts and things.
It seems like the pension industry's antiquated or out of date with the modern way that people retire, and they seem to be preparing people for a system or an older way of thinking about drawdown and retirement income.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that is going to be a challenge with the industry going forwards is, a lot of stuff we've talked about is really depressing, but we are going to get more and more people with a decent sized pot getting to retirement, and then they've got to manage that pot for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, how do they do that in a way that's sustainable, that gives them the best lifestyle they can, that makes sure they don't run out of money? And I could probably say a lot on that. It's probably a whole nother podcast, but I think there are going to grow up more and more tools people can use to help them with that. And obviously, if you've got a decent pot, then it probably does make sense to get advice at that point. But there are also like in between for, like, we know a lot of people don't get advice, and I think there are more and more tools that are going to help people with those decisions.
You looked at the performance of funds as well in general. So the market, what did you find?
Well, they vary quite a lot. They do vary quite a lot. So there's been more focus on this recently. The regulator looks at all the main sort of pension providers and they rate them. And you can look up, if you want to geek out for a few hours, there's literally a report on value for money for each of the pension funds, and they'll be rated green, orange, red on value. And I think a lot of the more modern pensions are roughly comparable in terms of performance, but unless they're de-risking too early, which we've already talked about. But some of these, there is a lot of variation between them, depending what provider you're with. I'm not going to get into the individual providers, but you could sometimes look and say, well, I don't actually want to be in their default fund because I don't want to be de-risking. Have they got a equivalent of sort of a tracker fund that I could switch to?
Or a 100% equities fund or an 80% equities fund.
Yeah, and they'll often have like quite a lot of choice, but you have to do a bit of digging. You have to dig around online and go, what sort of fund is that? It's not really that easy. You do have to do quite a lot of digging. I used to do all this years ago, probably why I got into being a pensions geek. But like, look them up on Trustnet or Morningstar and you can see, what's that fund performance been over 5 years compared to the benchmark?
You get it on the fact sheets a lot of the time as well.
You
do. So if you just click, it opens up, and they'll normally have like a bar chart that says benchmark, and then us. And if they're way off, you're like, this is not great.
You can see what that fund's benchmarking to. So if you decided you wanted a global tracker or something, you could like try and work out which of their funds is like most similar to it, say. And
I think a good thing to do is to go find a global index or a tracker. So you could find like a big ticket one like VWRL, Vanguard's World Fund, and have that there, the performance of that. So if you think that your pension should be align that, you can kind of sit them side by side and go, my pension is way off this. Why did the global stock market got 15%, but my pension went up 3%? You're not capturing the returns of the market then.
Yeah,
and if you're in your 20s and 30s and you're looking to do that, you go, what is replicating the market the best?
I know that the worst performers were like negative returns over 5 years in some categories.
In a crazy bull run, we've just had a good time on the global stock market.
So it can
How
vary.
Are they missing it? What are they doing?
And some of the providers, when you dig through like their value for money report, it will say this particular legacy, because what happens is like they mopped up a lot of the smaller pension providers over the years, and they'll say, well, this legacy fund is really poorly performing. So if you've got a pension that, you've had for 15 years, 20 years or something, and you haven't paid it much attention, you could well be in one of these older funds that's really poorly performing, has quite high fees as well, potentially. And you can transfer out, but they're not necessarily going to do it for you.
Yeah. When I set up my SIP during the podcast last year. And the first thing I was doing is I spent a lot of time trying to figure out which provider to go for. Does it really matter which provider to go for? Or is it better to just, like you said, focus on the funds? Because I end up with Hargreaves Lansdown, but I keep thinking, should I go for someone else? Is there a better provider? Or is it just about mainly the fund and doesn't screw the provider?
So most of the SIP providers are similar in terms of what funds you can buy. Some have slightly different funds. So there might be some more obscure funds you can get with some providers and not others. But generally, most of the main ones you can get with most of the main providers. They're pretty similar. I guess it's going to depend on what you like the feel of, like what you find's got a good interface for you. There's also some nuances on fees and things like that between providers. But they are relatively similar. So Hargreaves, they charge a percentage fee. Some other providers, I give a shout out to Interactive Investor, my old employer, they're a flat fee. So, if you've got a big fund, then it's going to be cheaper for you potentially because it doesn't go up as your pension gets bigger.
Yeah. Okay. On financial interests, plug for the website that I own. We do a comparison of all SIP brokers. It updates. It's got fees, features, all of that. So I link that.
He's my friend. He didn't tell me about this.
You didn't ask
when I was setting up my SIP.
Because
you've even got like InvestEngine, which is fee free potentially on the platform side, but then there's questions around long term, like how long does that last? So fees aren't everything. I think different providers for different things. You could do like an IBKR or HL. They're a bit more, they lean more towards the person who wants like all the bells and whistles. Or you could get like a Vanguard, which is only Vanguard funds, pretty stripped back. Do you want to deal shares inside of your SIP, or do you just want to buy funds? Do you want ETFs? Do you want, you kind of got to ask yourself a few questions before you can say who the best platform is. I think it's not like supermarkets where it's like you can get pretty much the same kind of food at all of them. They do offer different features, benefits.
That was a clip from our chat with Alice Guy. It's all about pensions. To watch a full episode, click right here.